An invasive species is any organism, a plant, an animal, a fungus, a pathogen, a parasite, that is relocated from its place of biological origin to a new ecosystem where it causes harm or has the potential to cause harm.
An invasive species to me is a plant or animal organism which did not evolve in the place where it was introduced to. And because it didn't evolve there, it can cause a lot of issues.
Every organism on the planet has the potential to become invasive, to become harmful, if it is moved to a new ecosystem. The plants, animals, and other organisms that get moved aren't inherently bad. They aren't malicious. They aren't evil. We have created a situation in which their effort to survive has detrimental impacts on the new place and the organisms that already live there. The problems are the result of a dysfunctional relationship. We create the problem.
I'd like to bring that back and remind people that it's not the fault of this plant or this invasive snake or fish that it's here and causing some sort of damage. It's simply doing what it would like to do on any site, which is grow and reproduce the same sort of biological imperatives that guide all species. But because we've removed it from the context in which it normally does that, it grows out of control.
Many of the invasive species that have caused the greatest damage in the United States are native to other countries. For example, the emerald ash borer originated in East Asia. The lionfish comes from tropic waters of South Pacific and the Indian Ocean. In the U.S., these non-native species thrive in environments that are similar to their place of origin. It is also possible for a species native to the U.S. to become invasive within the U.S. For example, the American bullfrog is native to the eastern U.S. and invasive in the western U.S., where it has caused substantial harm to native wildlife. Of course, it's also possible for species native to the U.S. to become invasive in other countries. The American bullfrog is, again, one example. Pathways are the routes and means by which humans move non-native species from one ecosystem to another, often over very long distances. People have a strong desire for things that are new, different, exotic, and to have the things they desire available on a regular basis. Entire industries worth billions of dollars exist to fulfill the human desire for more, to satisfy a variety of tastes and a diversity of cultural norms. For example, the pet industry imports a wide range of species so that we can populate aquariums, terrariums, cages, and yards. The seafood industry helps put something out of the ordinary and potentially yummy on our plates. The construction industry moves equipment and materials such as lumber and tiles. In many cases, the items that are imported are not intended for introduction to new ecosystems. However, accidents do happen. There are many examples. A disease or insect may be inadvertently introduced on imported fruit. Monk parakeets have been known to escape their cages and colonize urban environments. Various fast-growing plants are imported to help control erosion at construction sites, along road margins, and at the edges of waterways. It has been common practice since the arrival of early colonists and explorers to introduce non-native plants and animals to serve as food or medical supplies.
Well, a lot of the invasives got out here with the earliest settlers and were agricultural contaminants. In more recent years, horticultural plants have become more and more common as the source of invasion from the urban areas. So the old is agriculture and the new is sort of the latest influence of humans on the landscape, which tends to be bringing plants from all over the world that are decorative and look pretty.
So one of the issues we have in the horticultural industry is that we're kind of responsible for a lot of the plants that are escaping cultivation.
Of course, those things designed to move things can move things, often more than it was intended to move. For example, ships have to take in and discharge ballast water in order to stay afloat. This water can contain hundreds of organisms, from microscopic algae to fish. The containers in which commodities are transported are frequently contaminated with insects, spiders, and rodents. The wooden crates and pallets by which commodities are moved may be infested with insects, pathogens, and parasites that have the potential to destroy forests and trees. Kudzu, a plant of Chinese origin that is sometimes referred to as the vine that ate the South, was showcased at the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exposition as a miracle plant. Initially, it was planted as a garden novelty. However, from 1935 to the mid-1950s, farmers in the southern U.S. were encouraged to plant kudzu to reduce soil erosion. It did the trick, and then some.
Kudzu, the plant that ate the South. Kudzu, again, is particularly in the South, is a huge invasive vine. It can grow incredibly quick, incredibly fast, and when it does so, completely blanket an area, smothering everything below, not letting sunlight get down to the plants that are below it. It can also climb trees, and when it does so, not only is it shading the things down below, but the weight of it can be quite dramatic, and again, in storms and things like that, it can cause trees to topple over, acting almost as a sail catching the wind.
My great-great-grandfather introduced kudzu for at least two good reasons: to control soil erosion and to replenish nitrogen in the soils after decades of row cropping. So there were good reasons to introduce kudzu. There were benefits. The problem, of course, that we can recognize in hindsight is that over time, the harms from the introduction of kudzu have far outweighed the benefits. Now, if you look at the top here in the timeline, you're watching is the spread of kudzu over time. The problem is now spread nationwide, increasingly with climate change, and now getting more severe because kudzu's been joined by another species from Asia, from whence kudzu came, the kudzu bug, which does eat kudzu, but more problematically eats a close relative of kudzu, which is soybean. And in the areas of the epicenter of the invasion of the kudzu bug in Georgia, we've seen declines in soybean yields of as much as 20%. So in general, this is one of hundreds of illustrations where small beginnings, in this case intentional introductions of a plant, unintentional introductions of a bug, can lead to huge impacts. It is one of, unfortunately, thousands of examples in this country and around the world where an organism was introduced intentionally for good reasons, but without sufficient foresight about all the bad effects that would ultimately outweigh the relatively modest benefits.
In many cases, we don't know when or how an invasive species was originally introduced into a new ecosystem. Not all non-native species are harmful, of course. Some may even be considered beneficial. The European honeybee, for example. Insect pollination is integral to food security in the United States. European honeybees enable the production of at least 90 commercially grown crops in North America. They contribute over $14 billion annually to the value of U.S. crop production. Many of the country's crops would not exist without the presence of the European honeybee at bloom time. Approximately 35%, more than 1/3 of the food produced around the world, depends on animals to pollinate flowers.
Well, the European honeybee is vitally important to U.S. agriculture. They say that 1 in 3 bites of food that we consume are dependent upon pollination by a honeybee. And so most of the foods that you eat, tomatoes, squash, watermelons, cantaloupes, walnuts, hazelnuts, Brazil nuts, avocados, mangoes, strawberries, blackberries, blueberries. I mean, you eat some of those, I'm sure you do. So those are all, pollinated by the European honeybee.
Some places are particularly susceptible to invasion and the impacts of invasive species. This includes places that have already experienced other environmental disturbances. In this context, the native species may already have been adversely impacted and comprised in their ability to compete for limited resources.
John, this is, I guess, unfortunately, your typical trail side, where we've got a ton of different kinds of invasives. Trails, of course, the little light patches, and because of disturbance and because things stick to people's legs, they become an automatic area for invasives to kind of start to dominate. It's amazing what a big mess we have here.
People talk to me all the time about why should I care? What does this mean? And basically it's displacing the native vegetation of Virginia.
Yeah. And that is true. Unfortunately, these plants, they may serve some other values as far as some people may think that they look pretty or whatever. But the bottom line is it doesn't support anywhere near as much native insects and of course the birds and the bats that feed on those insects. So it's a very losing proposition for everything, even though to the untrained eye it looks like just a nice green trail side. It's unfortunate.
Climate may also have a substantial role in determining if a species becomes invasive. An organism is most likely to thrive if it's introduced into an ecosystem that has a climate similar to that of the place in which it is native, where it originated on the planet. Invasive species pose a substantial threat, maybe the greatest threat to island ecosystems, island economies, and island people. Because many islands have a long history of isolation, they host species that are adapted to those specific places. They are endemic. They are not found anywhere else in the world. When invasive species are introduced to islands, they may experience little competition from the native species and have few predators.
Invasive species for islands is pretty easy to define. So invasive species are things that didn't get here by the 3 W's, the wind, the wings, or the water. They came to the islands by people or our conveyances, our planes or boats. And then when they got here, they were able to multiply, reproduce, and when they get to levels that they cause harm, then we can consider them invasive. Not every non-native species is invasive, but some that cause harm are.
Introduce species onto island ecosystems has something that started many thousands of years ago, particularly with people moving around. The first documented introduction of non-native introduced species was introduced rodents onto islands about 2,500 years ago. There's many direct and indirect impacts on their lives, on their daily lives, everything from their economies, from their agricultural, food production, through the biodiversity, through their day-to-day living, through the impact of their health care as well.
So the impacts are pretty broad in Hawaii. You're also looking at things like biting ants that are getting into people's houses. You're looking at different things that affect people's daily lives. Our agriculture is impacted greatly by pests that are coming in that are impacting production. So if I look at how broadly things are being impacted, they're impacting probably every facet of our lives here.
Some of the impacts caused by invasive species are obvious. You don't have to be an expert on invasive species to recognize that there's a problem when a forest is smothered in vines, or livestock are lying dead in a field, or large numbers of people are hospitalized with a rapidly spreading disease. However, many of the ways in which invasive species impact our lives are more subtle, and we may not even realize that there is a problem, or that the problem is caused by invasive species.
In 2004, David Pimentel and his colleagues did a study on the environmental impacts of invasive species in the U.S. Found that they were over $100 billion annually. Unfortunately, that's likely a significant underestimate. But what we do know is that the price tag is significant and that everyone is paying the price.
Among coffee drinkers, the average consumption in the United States is about 3.2 cups of coffee per day.
Worldwide, the coffee industry has an economic value exceeding $70 billion annually.
Americans spend approximately $17 billion on coffee each year. There are more than 20 million coffee farming families producing coffee in more than 50 countries. Their lives depend on our daily fix.
If the coffee borer beetle gets its way, the value of the coffee industry will likely plummet, and that price of your morning coffee will skyrocket.
The coffee borer beetle is a small black beetle just a few millimeters long that is native to Africa. The females bore holes in coffee berries and then lay their eggs in the seeds within, the bits that we know as coffee beans. The larvae devour the beans when they hatch, destroying them. In Brazil alone, the beetle has caused $300 million worth of crop losses. But that's just one example. The beetle has spread to coffee-making nations all over the world. This little pest is the single greatest threat to your morning routine, your day, and the people who have to interact with you. The coffee borer beetle has the potential to become a worldwide threat. Fighting it matters. You may not have realized it until now, but you are paying the cost of invasive species. That cup of coffee would cost less if coffee growers weren't having to use chemicals or other approaches to keep invasive species from destroying their crops. This is true of all the food you eat, the clothes you wear, and the materials used to build your home. How much money do you pay to keep your lawn or garden weed-free? How much to vaccinate your kids or pets so they don't get sick? Ever had to hire an exterminator because of rodents or roaches or something called a Formosan termite? You are paying for invasive species. When species go, there are consequences, costly ones. What's the value of a bat to human health? They eat all those disease-carrying mosquitoes. I consider my health priceless. What's the value of a bat to agriculture? They eat all those crop pests. How about billions of dollars per year? How about as high as $53 billion per year in the US alone? Oh yeah, and when bats eat bugs, we can reduce our needs for pesticides. That's good for our health, the planet's health, and our wallet. The impacts that invasive species have on tourism are among the most impactful economically, especially to small communities that depend on tourism. Of course, some of these impacts can only be measured by the heart. There are places we love and experiences that make us who we are.
So welcome to our farm up in the mountains of the Blue Ridge near Shenandoah National Park. And we're here to look for our favorite invasive species up here, which is the stink bug. And to start off, I'm going to put on my jacket and we'll see. Oh my goodness. So this is what we're dealing with. So we're up at our Blue Ridge Mountain yurt that we use as an Airbnb rental. And what I'm going to do is unroll the outside cover of one of the windows and show you just how many of these critters can get in one space at any given time. This is a light season for these bugs. They have had a very significant impact on our lodging rentals through Airbnb. Our guests, in some cases, were checking in and then coming down to the house and saying they couldn't stay because of the number of bugs. We tried everything we could think of. We used the little lamps with the soda pop. We did everything. But as you can see, you know, there are a lot of them. Even on an off year, there's just a ton. And our guests didn't like it. It takes 3 or 4 trips every day to get this place as bug-free as we possibly can. On a yearly basis, these bugs are costing us $10,000 to $15,000 in lost revenue that we desperately need to keep ourselves going. And it's not just us.
Greene County is one of 8 other localities that surround and are part of, make up the Shenandoah National Park. The tourism industry has a significant impact in the county. The invasive species in the area are really threatening the park, the culture of the park, the habitat, the wildlife, the ecosystem of the park. There's Tree of Heaven that has taken over. A lot of the overlooks are being overcrowded by them. And then the Japanese honeysuckle has taken over a lot of the walls. And then the gypsy moths, you can see the impact that they have on a number of trees. They've stripped them down to basically just bare branches. The invasive species grow quicker than the native plants. So when you go up and you look on the overlooks of the park, and that often they're being blocked by these plants that grow much faster than the native plants. It's very costly for the park to come in and remove those. In addition, the iconic stone walls that the Shenandoah National Park is known for. If you go up there during the summer, it's very difficult for the Park Service to keep up with the fast-growing vines and the cover. Being a locality so close to the park, we are directly dependent on the economy based from the tourism. When the park is healthy, our tourism is healthy as well, and that has a strong impact on our local economy.
Invasive species also threaten human health and safety.
We have all kinds of different organisms that fall under the invasive species category. The most well-known, for example, would be some parasites and pathogens of humans. SARS, MERS, avian flu, the kinds of viruses that we most fear these days, those are invasive species, even though we don't often call them that.
Invasive mosquitoes. There are already several different species in the U.S. can spread invasive pathogens, organisms that cause debilitating and deadly diseases. Heard of malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika virus, West Nile virus? These are just a few of the diseases associated with invasive mosquitoes.
Invasive species can have health implications as well. Here we have, as an example, Japanese barberry. And Japanese barberry was introduced in late 1800s, but later on became an issue as an invasive plant. Now, why should we care? It harbors a particular humidity factor that makes it ideal for brown-legged ticks, what people sometimes call deer ticks, and that's the kind of tick that can transfer Lyme disease. And when they remove barberry in places where they're infested, especially up in the Northeast and Connecticut and so forth, what did they discover? An 80% reduction in Lyme disease carrying deer ticks, brown-legged ticks. And it just shows you that by removal of this invasive species, we can also benefit ourselves and have less of a health issue. So control the barberry, and we have better health as well. Not just for the forest, but for the individuals around that forest.
Invasive plants may also cause allergies. Ragweed is a well-known example, or be toxic to humans, dangerously so. Giant hogweed is native to Asia. It's related to the carrot and looks pretty, but this tall, it can grow up to 15 feet or more, invasive plant is a human health and safety risk. The plant produces a toxic sap that is activated by ultraviolet light. Get some of these toxins on you, hang out in the sun, and the consequences can be dire. Severe, painful burns and large blisters that can leave scars. Some people have required surgery to graft on new skin, and if it gets in your eyes, there's a risk of permanent blindness. According to the Center for Disease Control, the number of illnesses caused by mosquito, tick, and flea bites have tripled in the United States over the last 13 years. The number of reported diseases from ticks more than doubled from 2004 through 2016 and accounted for more than 60% of all reported cases. This is worrisome for human health and the health of our pets.
The relationship between invasive species and our beloved pets is a complex one. Invasive species put our pets at risk. Rabies, distemper, Lyme's disease, toxic plants.
Most invasive species that are going to relate to your pets, animals, are going to relate to your dogs. Cats can develop heartworm disease, and dogs can develop heartworm disease, both of which are spread by mosquitoes. So mosquito control is a good way to control a lot of diseases. Fleas are something that we think of as just kind of a harmless pest. You know, they're itchy, they cause our pets to scratch, and they're kind of gross. But they can also cause diseases. Fleas are probably the optimal and most well-adapted of invasive species. They can survive in pretty much any condition.
And everyone knows about ticks. Yuck. Ticks can be invasive. They can also spread all sorts of diseases, like Lyme's disease and Ehrlichia, that threaten our pets' lives and threaten our own health if the ticks bite us instead.
So a lot of people have it in their yards. It's invasive, but it's also toxic. It has a glycoside in it that can cause stomach upset, trembling, tremors, and in some cases coma. So it can be a pretty serious toxicity if not controlled.
And there's something else to consider. Unwanted pets and their offspring can become invasive species. They prey on native wildlife, compete for food, and spread disease. Feral cats are among the most impactful.
It's actually listed to be among the world's most harmful invasive species. And so these cats that have been introduced result in, unfortunately, the killing of about 2.4 billion birds every year in the United States, the contiguous United States, and 12.3 billion mammals.
Here at the Wildlife Center of Virginia, we care for thousands of injured and orphaned wild animals. What we found is that when an animal has been attacked by a cat, its chances of survival are very, very small. Even here in a state-of-the-art wildlife teaching hospital where we have access to antibiotics, professional wildlife veterinarians, state-of-the-art medicine, less than 1 in 5 of birds will survive. Mortality is over 81% for small birds. For mammals, it's over 70%. In our study, we found 83 species of small birds and mammals that were cat victims. And among those are some of our most beloved species of garden birds. These are not vermin. These are animals that are part of our wildlife portfolio that makes the world a wonderful place in which to live.
The impact of invasive species on our culture, on our way of life, can be far more devastating than what we can measure in dollars. Some things that invasive species impact are priceless and irreplaceable.
It's like telling my mother, because she always asks me, what are you working on? And I tell her invasive species. So I have to explain to her what we mean by it. Like the flowers that she used for worshipping, for example, are not present anymore in India because Parthenium has overtaken the lands. So I'd like the general public to know that it deeply matters to them, all these things. Yes.
Well, I am a native Hawaiian. Invasive species impacts every part of our life. When I look at the ohia tree and the ohia blossom, I don't see just a tree or a blossom. I see my mother. I see my ancestors. I have a feeling that I get of well-being and happiness when I hold a blossom in my hand. The death of an ohia tree would be the death of my family. I cannot even begin to describe the loss I would feel if I lost my ohia tree. It is a priority for me to save. It is the most important thing that I can think of doing with my life is to save the ohia tree.
What's the most important thing that you can think of doing with your life?
We look at so many of these problems and we understand that they're human caused, and we sometimes have the tendency to dismiss them. But it's a human responsibility to fix that problem.
We need to take responsibility for our actions, for invasive species. There are people who have dedicated their entire lives to protecting our food, environment, health, and livelihoods from the impacts of invasive species. They are at the front line of invasive species prevention, eradication, and control. They help restore impacted ecosystems and other things we value.
We're the front line of defense for American agriculture at the ports of entry. I think the general public needs to realize the amount of support that we need from the public to keep invasive species out of the United States. To search vessels or containers for something that in some cases is microscopic is potentially an impossible task. So we can't do it without the support of the public, making sure that they're bringing in cargo that is not contaminated.
All over the country, there are dedicated professionals pulling and spraying invasive plants and removing invasive animals.
Yellow iris.
What's that?
It's a wetland invader found throughout the region. So getting keeping the invasive species out of the area of interest is obviously the most important, because that stopping the stuff coming in means it never becomes a problem. But once plants and animals get established, an early detection program where you find populations, you surveil for populations, and when you find them, you remove them, is much more cost effective. It took me 2 minutes to pull this plant out, and if we had come back in 5 years, it might take a crew of 4 all day to get rid of it.
The problem is, we all think it's doom and gloom and that there are no solutions, but there's solutions to every problem. It's just about creating awareness about the problem and getting governments and donors to actually support invasive alien species management. What needs to happen is there needs to be a coming together of various research agencies focusing on different aspects related to invasive species management.
Sometimes, once invasive species are removed, we need to help ecosystems recover, to become healthy, vital, thriving places again. This can be particularly true of the fragile island ecosystems that are home to endangered species. We can help protect what matters. We can take responsibility for our actions. We can make better choices.
I really care about tourism as a motive force on the planet, one that could harm or particularly help the places that are visited.
People have a great role in bringing things in, but they can also play a great role in keeping things out. So, especially when you travel, consider what you take with you. You want to try to take pictures, not necessarily bring home that crate of fruit to your family.
When you return to the United States from abroad, it's customary to bring back gifts for your friends. But if you bring back fresh fruit, meat, a plant, bird, or animal, you could present the whole country with harmful microscopic organisms. Choose a gift that'll never become a pest.
Habitats. Protect the natural environment from the impacts of unwanted pets. Never release unwanted pets. Habits. Ensure that pets are thoughtfully chosen and well cared for. Do right by your pets. Help pet owners find alternatives to the release of their pets.
Don't release your unwanted pets. Have a habit attitude.
Love the outdoors? Make sure that you aren't spreading invasive species while enjoying outdoor recreation. Clean your hiking boots and your equipment. Remove burrs from your pets.
Invasive species spread in some pretty strange ways. Check this out. Those are burrs which have seeds in them that are going to be transported on these boots. So it's really important when you're out in nature to always check your shoes, your pants, and even your pets for little stowaway seeds like this, because that could be how the next invasive gets established.
Thanks, Grandpa.
Do your part to prevent the spread of zebra mussels.
I love to travel with my bike and go to a lot of different areas, and I don't always know what the invasive species or problem species are for a given area, and so it's important for me to, when I'm playing, to keep my equipment clean. It runs better, and when I'm going to other areas, I know I'm not carrying these species with me. Play, clean, go.
Become a citizen scientist. Learn what's native and non-native in your area. You can use your smartphone to make a difference by reporting the locations of invasive species. Check out iNaturalist and EDD Maps apps.
Take an inventory, I think, of what's in your own yard, and where if you're accidentally helping things along by having invasive species in your own yard, then perhaps what you need to do is control what you can, and that is in your own yard. Go volunteer. There's lots of opportunities for things like invasive plant pulls, stream cleanups, things like that every individual can do. As a family activity, as an individual, as a corporate activity. So all of these help you involve yourself in a greater community, and that community is us being better members of the worldwide community.
Eat more invasive species. And I'll give you a very particular example, and that is the lionfish. They're such destructive animals. They're eating tons of juveniles all over the reef. They were introduced into the Caribbean. They're not normally from there. And as a result, we are losing all these phenomenal juvenile fish on the reefs throughout the Caribbean and even in Florida. And as a result, our reefs are slowly becoming degraded. So eat more lionfish.
Want to add invasive species to your diet and become an invasivore? Ask your local grocery store and favorite restaurants if they sell invasive species, maybe lionfish or blue catfish. You can find more information online. One restaurant in Washington, D.C., Tip Cow, has an entire menu dedicated to invasive species. That's good eating.
So I am very, very hopeful of the future because I've worked hard, and a lot of other people are realizing this, and they're working hard. And together, I think it makes for a bright future. It really does.
PremiumBeat.com